Video number 3, the finale of the Boomerang Lancer, amazing little sports jet. We're finishing this plane up in this video. Lots to do, engine test runs, all the equipment installation still left to do. So let's dive back into this plane. So last video was basically all of our surfaces, the wings, tail, all that stuff. We got all that organized. Now we're moving on to the other important things in the aircraft. So first thing we got to do is I'm going to get the nose gear installed. We're kind of working through our manual here, but nose gear is the next thing to take care of. Now I've just been playing around with equipment installation here, battery locations. This is why I really want to do one battery. We may lift this up a little bit because when the wheel retracts, it needs a little bit of space here, I believe. But that is why we need to get the nose gear installed to find out what kind of spacing we're needing right there. So we're going to get this aircraft on the stand, the Lukey stand, and flip it over. And we've got our landing gear installed. This is quite a simple installation. I'm very cautious and conscious of where I'm running my wires because I want them to be hidden and everything. So that's just me planning things out. So that's all installed. We're using the stock hardware. Did a little bit of sanding right here because when this gear comes out, our servo arm was just touching that a little bit. So anyway, sanded that down with my Dremel a bit and the nose gear is good. All right, so like usual, I find these smaller jets a bit of a struggle to plan things out, but I think I got everything planned out. I've put a lot of thought in this since yesterday, slept on it, and I think I'm good. So pretty much dedicated on going with the one battery setup. If the one battery setup doesn't work, we can, and when I say that doesn't work as far as weight goes, we can also stack 2 batteries like that in that area. So, but I'm pretty much dedicated to the one battery setup. M-speed sensor we're going to put right up in this corner right there. The front gear lead here, I think I'm going to run over, down, underneath the tray, and all of our gear leads are going to come up through that hole right there under the UAT. I was going to put another hole in this board, but if I can hide them underneath the UAT and come out and go right in, that's what I want to do. And UAT is mounting there, Cortex is mounting there. We've already figured all that stuff out. Our Rex 12, which is our primary receiver, is going to mount right in this area here. All these wires from the gear controller are going to go underneath. So most of our ugliness and wires are going to be hidden underneath this area right there. Data relay module for the turbine, we're going to put it up here. And this turbine, we've actually got 2 different modules. We've got the small one that you have to plug in the separate screen. I had this one as a spare, so I'm actually going to use this one to keep things more simple. I was going to mount the other one back here somewhere, but I think this is nice and clean and it's going to work well. We can run our other wires up alongside the tank. So that's pretty much that. The telemetry thing for Zykoy, we're going to have mounted on the elevator servo tray in that area. So it's going to be right in this spot, and that'll allow this lead to plug into here. And then our actual telemetry lead is going to run forward into our expander right here, which is probably going to be just underneath the board somewhere, again, hidden in the mess. The only thing that really I haven't figured out yet, but it's not really a big deal, is our DSM-10, which is probably just going to go, again, underneath the board. We don't really need good access to it, and so we'll figure that part out as well. But that's kind of the layout I'm going with. I needed to get all that figured out in order to keep things progressing here. So I think I'm going to pull all this stuff out. We're going to get that engine mounted next, and all of our various leads and components from the engine forward, and our leads from our data relay module forward as well. So we've got to run one from here forward to the fuel pump. Fuel pump, I guess I forgot to say, is going to mount right there, and that'll be a nice direct connection right to the UAT. All right, just making some slow progress here. We've got our M-speed sensor mounted. Those cables run. Our front gear cable is done. We've got our line coming to our M-speed sensor. And I'm just, I took the tank out so I could get all these lines nicely run. Now that we've got the plan in place, like we've got our gyro cables or our surfaces that go to the gyro coming to this area. I've got my receiver laid out here. So like this is our throttle that comes to port number 7. So everything's very neatly laid out. We've got our lines coming for our turbine up here, and the only real change that I've made is if you look back there, you'll see a block. That's a tank stopper. So the tank is going to slide in place, stop against that block. Our front bracket, this guy right here that we painted, holds it this way, and then our cross brace holds it down against the surface. The manual talks about using Velcro straps, but I think with this layout, it's going to work perfectly, and there's no reason for the Velcro straps, so the tank's not going to go anywhere. So that stuff is done so far. I think the next thing we need to do is our wing connectors to get those things run properly as well. So we've got to run our surfaces to this point, our gear extensions or whatever to this point. This is where all of our gear and brakes are going to come out. So, all right, so we've got the plane flipped over on our Lukey stand here, just got the engine bolted down. Now this Zykoy engine fits in there just beautifully. Don't have to do any adjustments to the spacing of the engine mounts. It just slips right in between there, and there's about 1 millimeter side to side, so perfection. As the manual states, we've got the cone sticking out, so we've gone about 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch or so coming out of the back of the fuselage. I believe I'm going to put some metal tape on the back here as well too, just for some heat protection underneath there. And the only thing we really have to deal with is our cable feeding the turbine. Now that's on the top side of the turbine. You got to remember that you're putting your turbine in upside down from this perspective, so the top of the turbine has to go towards the top of the aircraft. So we're going to put a keeper on our tank stopper on the other side, so when we flip this over we'll be able to see that. And the only other thing to do for this engine install is run our fuel line forward. So very simple install on the engine. All right, so we got our keeper installed right there, and that's where the turbine wire's coming through. And anytime I'm installing a keeper like that, I always put a little bit of shoe goop on there. The adhesive's great, but you don't want that to come off. So we are ready to install our fuel tank with everything from this point backwards. We've also run our fuel line to the turbine. That currently is just coming out of the intake here, and that'll run up to a valve right on the front of the tank on that crossboard, and then that will come to our fuel pump over here. So that's all done. So the last thing we need to do before we install the tank is get our plugs installed right here. Now the plugs are our wing connectors, just the other side of the wing connector. And I'm pretty sure what I'm going to do here is put a piece of wood glued from the back side so we can have a through fitting and our wing connector is solid. I don't want the wing connector to go inside this part of the fuselage. I want all of it to sit inside the wing. So we'll get that connector done up just following the same path or pattern that we did on the wing side. So we got our wing connectors done up here, so that's pretty straightforward. I just used some shrink tube, and the shrink tube you can see comes here. Reason for the shrink tube is we're going to have the wires come underneath and forward, and this is the air path right here, so I don't want those wires flapping around. That's why we want to put the sheathing on them. But once they get to the middle part of the fuselage underneath the board, then they split off and we've got our control surfaces and whatever going wherever they need. So that's how we've got those organized. So we're going to put our ends on there. The ends that came with the gear, those are already done. So we'll get those done up and routed to the appropriate locations. All right, so here is our single battery wiring harness. So the plug mounts in the front of the fuselage. All this stuff goes through the plug hole. So we've got our turbine fed directly from the battery. So this is just one bus connector, if you want to call it that. So this goes all the way back to the turbine. And then we've got the gear power right here, which is going right to the gear. And then we've got our DSM-10, which is switched with our remote switch. That powers our Rex 12, which powers all of the electronics for the flight controls. So that's our wiring harness. Now what we do is you just slip this through that hole right there, feed all those things to the right locations, and when that's ready, we'll glue that plug down into the fuselage. All right, so we got our wiring harness all installed. Pretty much everything is run where it needs to go. There's going to be some last minute things in between the receiver and such, but basically we've got, just to lay it out here for you, so there's our power plug in there. We've got our power for our primary receiver, our Rex 12 right there. Gear power is right here, so those guys are going to tuck in. Now these holes right here are underneath the UAT, so they're basically, the UAT comes here, so there's some space there, so we'll just tuck those wires in. This lead here is the lead from the DSM-10, and that plugs into our R3 switch, which is going to just sit right in this area. We've got our gear power, that connects there, right? And then our turbine power over here, that runs underneath the center and then comes up the side. So that stuff is all done. We can't plug any of this in until we get the tank installed, but we've got everything run for the turbine. We've got everything run for our surfaces, and that's it. Good success so far. So before we button anything up here, I want to make sure this actually works, and I'm happy with everything. So I paired the remote receiver on-off switch to my radio, and we've got a battery plugged in here, and everything is working like it should. So model's off, signal's off, receiver on, perfect. All right, so all of our wiring is run as we talked about. We've got our fuel line run, which is good. Now we can't put any of the equipment in here until we get that tank installed. So the last thing to do for the tank is get our vent line run here. So if you're looking at the aircraft like this, so we're going to have our vent sitting right on this side here, so it's going to be right down in this location. So we're going to run that vent, get that installed, just have the tube coming up here. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to run that tube around and then come to the vent line. That helps prevent fuel from coming out. So going to get that set up in the fuselage here, just using one of the DreamWorks vents right there, and that will be the last step. Then we'll be able to install this fuel tank and get our equipment installed. All right, so lots of little progress here. So we've got our fuel pump mounted. I mounted the fuel pump onto a faux carbon plate so that can come on and off nice and easy. We've got all of our leads done there. Battery holder is installed. UAT is installed, but we need to take the UAT out so we can get our plugs set in there, and our gear controller is installed as well. So now I'm going to take the UAT back out. We're going to get our receiver mounted, and then we'll put the UAT back in. All right, beautiful morning this morning. We've got our shop door open here, letting the cool breeze come in, cool things off. And we've got the Lancer all put together here. So let's do a gear cycle. Gear down. There we go. So gear on this little bird works beautiful. No issues with that at all. All right, so we got everything put back together, filled up our UAT. Reason for that obviously is when we do the CG, but I'm just gonna put that on the ground in a little bit here and check and see how light the nose weight is. I suspect that we're gonna have to put some nose weight in this plane anyways because of the single battery setup, but I think we should be close. I mean, that's a lot of stuff jammed forward, so. Okay, a couple things left to do in the equipment installation process. So this equipment came out of a previous plane, actually came out of my Kinetics. So I'm going to get these antennas mounted, and we've also got our clone receiver, which is this guy here, and we are going to get the clone receiver installed as well. Then we'll go through and shoe goop all of our connectors. So that's kind of the last bits for the equipment installation. All right, so we got our clone receiver mounted, put it up top here. Now this antenna here is just a spare antenna. So basically we've got 1, 2, 3. This one is our 4th, so we'll just duplicate it and put it up there. And this is the cable that I make up for this setup here. So this is going into Cortex port number A. A is going to be our clone, but we also need an additional power lead to supply the Cortex with extra power. So this plugs into the Cortex, this plugs into a spare port, and this plugs into our clone receiver. All right, so what we want to do now is we want to confirm that everything works properly, and we've also got to set up our Cortex for 2 receivers, even though the clone is an invisible receiver. So everything's plugged in, everything's hooked up. We're going to turn our plane on, and we're going to go into our model, Device Explorer, Cortex Pro, and we're going to go to Dual Setup On. And then Rex 12, I think we have one of our outputs set up for a backup input. Yes, this guy here. So we'll just change that to EX bus. There we go. So that's all set up. So now everything works on the plane. So all we need to do, and I haven't gooped any of this stuff yet, but we'll unplug our primary receiver. Primary receiver is unplugged. We still have full control of our plane. And there we go. So that is perfect. The primary receiver is still going to have power, but what this is doing is this is the signal that tells the Cortex what to do on the main controls. We've taken that EX bus plug out, and now the signal's coming just from the clone receiver. So everything is good. Now we'll put that guy back in, and we're going to go through and goop all of our connectors. All right, so we're going to put it on its legs here with the canopy on and see how we're balanced. Oh, that's better than I thought. I thought honestly that the nose was going to tip right up. Yeah, so UAT's full, batteries installed, canopy's on. Reason I want to check this with the canopy obviously is because our CG point's kind of back here. Most of the canopy is in front of the CG point. All right. Wow, that's, I don't think we're going to be that far off. Nice. Super cool. So it's definitely going to need some nose weight, because if we go past the 50% mark there of the flare, it tips backwards. And just remember that the tank is right over the CG, so the fuel is not going to affect anything. So yeah, we're going to have to add a little bit of nose weight, but I don't suspect very much. That's awesome. Very cool. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we are going to fill up the fuel system, and we're going to fill up the fuel system with our fueler from RC Custom 3D Printing. Joe makes these up. They're awesome. Automatic fill stations. So one of the cool things is, let's say we're going out and flying this aircraft. So we can program 4 aircraft in here. So first flight of the day, I just go to Rebel. I hit Rebel, and it fills up the fuel system with the set amount. So the other thing is you can go to manual, and we can start this and figure out exactly how much fuel goes into the fuel system. This is crazy. This is a good sized fuel tank for this plane. So I haven't filled it up completely. There's a little bit of air in there, you can see. But we're basically 3 liters is what we are. So that is really awesome. With this X95, that's going to be a great flight time on this thing. So my CARF Rebel Classic, that is, I think 3 or 3.2 liter tank. And I fly that thing for, I think, 7 minutes, and I'm landing with 45% fuel. This thing with an X95, same size tank kind of thing, it's going to be pretty crazy. So probably 10-minute flight time, I'm suspecting, pushing it pretty hard, and still landing with probably 30-40% fuel. So it's going to be fun. Anyways, so now we've got the fuel done, so we will program our fuel in our Zykoy telemetry / turbine system. All right, so we just had the Lancer on our RC CG machine, and the RC CG machine, I love this thing because it makes measuring so much easier with your electronic scales. We're using the Zykoy scales here, but the numbers are just super simple to get. So anyways, as I suspected, we had to add some nose weight. So what I've done, kind of broken this out into 2 different categories. So number 1, I'm doing my permanent nose weight here, and this is underneath the landing gear. I'm doing it there because it's going to be permanent stuff, really never have to remove it, so that's done. I'm going to add a little bit more on the underside of the tray here, and that's going to be removable weight. So if we want to take that out later on, we can get that out fairly easy as well. So I'm going to put that front gear back in, and we'll get it back on the machine. All right, so while we got it upside down, we got our gear back in, put our rear cover plate on. That's not going to affect the CG much, but now we can put this back on the scale and see where we're at. All right, so with our airplane back on the stand here, I've just put 4 strips of weights in the nose section here. I folded them up. This is kind of where I want to put them, but on the underside of this tray here. And then so without canopy on, we are tail heavy 0.2 pounds. Put the canopy on, and we are basically bang on. The measured CG location is what the manual is suggesting. Now it does feel a little heavy on the nose for my liking, but we'll see. Obviously we'll fly it, and that's the point of having that weight in this area, is that it's easy to remove. So final weight, UAT full, no fuel in the tank. We are 16.8 pounds. That's 1.67 pounds on the nose. So we're going to fly it in this location, and then we'll remove weight as we see fit. And our final numbers here differ a little bit from the manual because we've got, there's some variance here in where you can set the wheels up on the aircraft. So you can slide the forward gear mount frontwards, backwards a little bit. So there's going to be some variance there. But here's my measurement. So 648 wheelbase. We got 64 between CG and wheels, which is bang on to what that says. So with those numbers that I used, this is where we came. So 15.73 pounds. Basically, we had to add roughly a pound of weight to get it where it needs to be. So of course, because we only used one battery, that's what I was expecting. Now, if you are doing a 2 battery setup or 3 battery setup, you're probably going to have to be a little bit more careful on your battery selection, because if you're using 3 batteries in the nose, you may end up nose heavy. But in our case, I only want to use 1 battery, so I expected that we were going to have to add nose weight, and we'll go from there. So as we do the maiden flights, the maiden flight will do a talking maiden flight, so I'll tell you guys all about it. Well, my goal is to do 3 flights on the maiden day, and I'll share with you the differences that we come up with on surfaces, CG marks, how much weight we're removing, etc., etc. And next thing we need to do is get this aircraft back on the stand. We're going to add our weight into the nose, as I've talked about, and then we're going to get our surfaces set up. All right, so setup time here for all of our surfaces. So what I will do for our first flight is we will get everything set up just like the manual says. So normal flight, we've got those surfaces. We've got takeoff flap setting, landing flap setting. So I'm probably going to give it a little bit more elevator throw just in general as a standard number, and then we'll go from there. But everything looks fairly normal, and then we're going to add the amount of elevator mix when we're at full flaps and takeoff flaps. So we're pretty much going to get it set up like this, and we'll see how that flies. All right, so while we've got both wings here, I figured I would show you the difference between these, and I was curious myself, between the Rebel Hot wings, which are on top, and the Lancer wings. So the back is lined up, the root of the wing is lined up, and you can see the difference here. So it doesn't look like much, but that's a substantial difference in wing area. So yes, the plane is a little bit heavier, but it does have a little bit more wing surface area. Tail surfaces are a little bit larger as well. All right, so our final little steps here are as follows. So number 1, we've got to do our tow-in on our landing gear, and then we're going to do an engine run on this thing. I'm just waiting for the rain to stop, actually. That's why we're doing the tow-in. So if you look at the wing to fuse joint here, I think this will show up on camera, but they're not parallel to the center line of the fuselage. They're angled back towards the vertical stab. So you can't really use these root of the wings as an accurate line to get things set up. So in this case, we're going to flip the plane over, and we'll see what we have to do to be creative to adjust the tow-in on this aircraft. All right, so using our tape line here, basically this inside edge is the edge that's lined up with the arrow. And what I did was measure from that tape line over 200, not the number doesn't really matter, but, and then what we can do is we take our piece of carbon, line it up here, and this shows us that we are a little bit of toe out right now. I don't know if that's going to show up for you guys or not, but anyways, this is a great representation of what's actually happening here. In this case, I just used a ruler laid down. I mean, a piece of tape's a little bit more permanent, but I'm going to loosen this guy off and add a little bit of toe in, because right now we are towed out. This is one of those kind of critical things that's important. Over the past month, I've had 3 people contact me wondering why their planes aren't tracking properly. It's been planes that I've built before, and one of the first things I told them was, do you have tow-in on your mains? And the reason they didn't check that is because they assumed that it came from the manufacturer set up properly. They don't. And here's a great example. You know, JP landing gear, they might just put these in a jig and set them up, and in this case they've got a little bit of tow out. So always check your tow in on your gear. You only want a couple degrees, and it makes a big difference in how your plane tracks on the ground. All right, so we got the plane on the ground here. We're going to go through the normal test run procedure. So we're going to start up the engine, allow the idle to stabilize. There's a bunch of air bubbles in the fuel line, so it should hopefully start. But we'll let the idle stabilize. Over about 20 seconds, we're going to slowly go to max throttle, let the max throttle stabilize, bring it back down to idle. We're going to do some acceleration checks on it, so just some quick acceleration checks. We'll do a restart test on it as well too to confirm that that works. And that's basically the test run. So as we go through that, I'll put on the screen exactly what we're doing. Let's start this up. Okay, power's on. Now I'm just going to sneak behind it here, confirm that we're okay, we don't have any flames shooting out anywhere. right, so thoughts of that test run. Obviously, we did a forced restart. You saw when I was shaking the plane, obviously we dislodged or unlodged an air bubble, and that shut down the turbine and it automatically restarted. So we did that check. Everything's running good on it. And initial thoughts, if you're closer to sea level, this would be a ballistic and not good combination. Well, it's fun, but at our elevation, it's going to be a great combination, I think, and hopefully we get to fly this here pretty quick. But looking forward to this plane. Good combination, great layout, pretty cool little jet. All right, guys, and that wraps up the assembly series on the Boomerang Lancer aircraft. Very quick to put this thing together. If you are planning on getting one of these, or you already have one of these and you haven't put it together yet, obviously it's a quick process, and things are obviously a little bit tight in there depending on your equipment selections that you go with, but ultimately great quality aircraft. I'm happy, as I've mentioned, to see all of the composite construction throughout the aircraft, and from what I've seen in other videos, it's going to be a great little flyer. Such a fun aircraft just to toss in a vehicle and not take up much room, and easy to transport, fairly inexpensive to put together. So stay tuned for the maiden videos. So what I'm going to do on those first flights is we're going to get the maiden flight out of the way. I'll talk through the entire flight and tell you guys exactly what I'm doing through that flight, and I'll assuming everything goes well, we'll also do flight number 2, flight number 3, and possibly more, but I will share with you the adjustments that I'm going to make as well. So we're set to pretty much the stock throws everywhere, the stock CG location with some removable weight, etc., etc. And what we'll do is over the first couple flights, we'll be making those changes, and I'll tell you guys what those changes are, and I'll show you our final travels and stuff that we settle with, or that I settle with, on this aircraft. So stay tuned for that. Maiden flight hopefully coming up soon. Thank you to Boomerang Jets for allowing us to put this plane together, and it was definitely a treat, and I'm really looking forward to flying it a bunch this year. Thank you guys for watching the build series, and also thank you to channel members. Channel members, it's kind of a special thing. Channel members get to see our videos a couple weeks before they actually come out on YouTube. So generally we are a couple weeks ahead on videos. So the videos, if you're not a channel member that you're seeing, the channel members have seen those a couple weeks, 1 to 2 weeks in advance. So if you are interested in channel membership, there's some links down below. Check them out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.